Welcome to another edition of the Corner Booth Podcast, live from Greenspot Restaurant here in Montreal, along with our special guest tonight, Christopher Skeete, the CAQ M&A for St. Rose Laval, and also, of course, Parliamentary Secretary for Relations with English-speaking Quebecers to the Premier himself. Chris, thanks for being here.
Always a pleasure to be here.
Along with Bill Brownstein of the Montreal Gazette and Lesley Chesterman. And Chris, you're very graciously agreed to be here tonight.
I'm sandwiched.
On the firing line, you can't escape. And the reason we're all sitting here maskless, of course, is because we're all eating, which is the only reason we could possibly be maskless. And drinking. So, first of all, thank you for coming here. Much appreciated.
Thanks for the invite.
I want to start off with the story that's actually most in the news right now, the most current thing that's happened, which is a story I read this morning from Radcan that says that you're upset that you were not consulted by Simon Jolin Barrette, the minister responsible, over what looks like a division in the CAQ over Bill 96 and how it'll be applied and how it's going to look. Is that true?
Well, there was a lot of discussions about Bill 96 in our caucus. I'm not going to discuss things that are discussed in our caucus. But the good news is I had a chance to exchange with the Premier, and ultimately the Premier decided that on which way we're going to go. So I'm not going to get into details because you're not supposed to report what goes on in the caucus. Someone didn't really follow that rule. We're not too happy about it, but the good news is when I went to the Premier and told him the concerns that I had about some of the things that we heard after the consultations, because we did hear some disconcerting things after the consultations, he decided that we weren't going to extend it beyond what we had already put forward.
Is there a split in the party now over Bill 96?
We're a coalition, right? So there are people who are all over the political spectrum in terms of how they view language, how they view any subject, really. The good news is we've always managed to be moderate in the things that we bring forward, and this was no different. After the consultations, some of the demographers had some really worrying trend lines for us. It forced us to say, hey, are we really still in the right place? Is this really what we should be doing? We had discussions about it. Not everybody was on the same page. In the end, we rallied around what the Premier decided. So I think it's normal to have those kind of discussions in the caucus. We had them. I'm happy.
All right, I'm going to ask my colleagues as well. Guys, Bill?
Do you ever feel like a salmon swimming upstream as the sole Anglo in the CAQ and representing Anglo, well, basically in charge of Anglo constituency? How does that go over?
Well, what I tend to equate is, I'm always in two realities, right? So for me, that's nothing new. I'm half white, half black. I grew up in a Francophone household, but went to an English school. So I'm used to having sort of living those two realities. I guess anybody with less experience would find it daunting, but no, I think it's normal and I think it's good. I think the English community doesn't realize the place that they have in our caucus, even though I'm the one carrying that message.
Try to explain to our listeners, viewers, Anglos, historic or otherwise, why they should not feel threatened by Bill 96.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's one of the reasons why I'm here. Bill 96 does a lot of things, but one of the things it doesn't do is affect English-speaking Quebecers. In fact, what it does is it further enshrines the protections that were there after Bill 101 and gives them certain advantages. For starters, English-speaking Quebecers have priority access to CJEPs in the English CJEP system now for the first time ever, and that's a big problem in the community because a lot of English-speaking Quebecers are being excluded in their network to access higher education because they were competing unfairly with Francophones who were throwing themselves on a limited number of schools. Another advantage that English-speaking Quebecers now have that they didn't have before is access to French classes. One of the things that I heard in my consultation in 2019 was that English-speaking Quebecers thought it was weird that here we are spending all this money to bring immigrants here, teaching them French, and yet we don't give the same access to French courses to English-speaking Quebecers. That's something that's in this bill as well. Now, for the rest, in terms of accessing the government, accessing services and things like that, nothing changes for English-speaking Quebecers, even those who were not born in Quebec, because there's a grandfather clause. So, in a lot of ways, this is good news for the English community because it enshrines the rights that they already had after Bill 101.
Yet, there are but 200 different points in Bill 96, only 10 of which deal with Anglos. So I'm a little skeptical about that because so many people are so concerned about all of that, and it seems that, like people are not being totally clear.
Yeah, and I get that, but the parts that you're citing are actually the parts where we say except the English community. So in all those places where the English community is actually mentioned, what we're hearing is no, well, this applies, but the English community is out of scope. For instance, one of the biggest concerns that I hear from the English community is about access to healthcare. I've tried to say it. I've said it ad nauseum. But Section 15 of the Health and Social Services Act remains unaffected by this bill. Section 133 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that gives the English-speaking Quebecers access to justice in their language, again, is not affected by this bill. And furthermore, it's out of scope of the notwithstanding clause, so we couldn't even do it. So it's one of those things that I think there's a lot of suspicion, a lot of fear. I think the past 50 years with the separatist movement and the Bill 101 first iteration, I think it left scars. And I think there's some suspicion and some fear, genuine fear.
But people are genuinely freaked out.
I agree. I agree that they're freaked out. My job is to try and make sure that they understand what this bill is and what it isn't, which is why I'm here.
All right, Lesley has a question.
Right now you said what this bill is and what this bill isn't. So you're saying it's not an anti-English Anglo, we can say, bill. However, it is an anti-bilingualism bill. And being a Montrealer who's anglophone, who's worked in both languages, whose children are bilingual, who always went to English and French schools, I actually, fine, things are okay for me. I'm English, things are okay for me. But I do have a problem with this idea that you're kind of snuffing out the idea of what a great thing bilingualism in the city and robbing Francophone kids who want to go to English school the opportunity to broaden their education.
Well, I disagree.
For me, it's a very narrow-minded approach.
I disagree that we're robbing people the opportunity, because there's two types of bilingualism. There's institutional bilingualism, and there's bilingualism as a virtue for individual merit. For instance, I'm fluently bilingual. It's one of the best things that I carry from as a calling card. So I'm very happy to be fluently bilingual. I think you can't do well in North America if you're not bilingual.
So you're for bilingualism? Is the CAQ for bilingualism?
I think on an individual level in North America, you absolutely have to add tools to your kit, and being bilingual is one of those tools. But that's different from our common language. In 1977, when we passed the French Charter, we decided in Quebec that the common language in Quebec was going to be French. So that means, for instance, and a good example of common language versus bilingualism as a personal thing would be, if you go to South Florida, I spend time sometimes in South Florida, and when I go to the metro, or not the metro, when I go to Walmart, there's a lot of Spanish in South Florida, probably more than there is English. But even though there's a lot of Spanish there, the common language is English. So if you bump into somebody in the street, we say, excuse me, right? There's like this default that goes to the common language, which in the case of the United States is English. That's what we say when we say that in Quebec, French is the common language. It doesn't mean that it's not good to be bilingual, trilingual, or quadrilingual.
But when it comes to, you were talking about CJAD education, why are so many Francophone kids, why do they want to go to CJAD? Why do they want to be educated in
That's
English?
easy, because our education system does a piss poor job of teaching English at the elementary and high school level, and they feel obligated to go get that added training in the limited CJEPs that we have. Now, that is not the same problem as extending or providing access to Francophones in CJEP. I think the problem, let's name it what it is, means we're doing a bad job at the primary and high school level. In the same way that we fail English-speaking Quebecers in teaching them French at the primary and high school level in order to make them functional in a Francophone Quebec. So it's ironic, but I'm able to say that because the Francophones are throwing themselves on the CJEP system because they're not being taught adequately at the lower levels. And they feel that this is their last chance to get it in before they can go on and conquer the world.
So is the CAQ interested in bettering the English education for Francophones?
We're definitely interested in that. And to be fair to my colleagues who in the opposition, I mean, when I was growing up, you didn't learn French till grade 6. That went down to grade 4, and now we're down to kindergarten. So there is that slow realization that you can't be in North America and not speak English and do well. But at the same time, we have a desire, and a deep desire to protect what makes Quebec special, and that is French. We have to protect that common language, but that removes nothing from anybody's personal added value of being bilingual, trilingual, or whatnot.
Is part of what you see, I mean, if Bill 96 passes, and I believe that's where part of the division is right now within the party itself, the hardliners within the CAQ, if we can call them that, want to apply Bill 101 to CJEPs. The others, and I'm assuming you're in that group, do not. Is that going to be a fight?
I don't think it's a fight because the Premier already said we're not going there. So,
but the French media is pushing you hard.
I don't know.
The Journal de Montréal is pushing you hard.
I would say whoever's leaking from the caucus is pushing hard, but the Premier is pretty confident that that's not what Quebecers want, and I don't think it's the right call. A lot of people in the caucus don't think that that's the right call. But again, I think this is normal, right? Like, we tend to put a lot of emphasis on divisions in political parties, and sometimes there are, and sometimes they're bad. But I think it's normal that after a consultation that invited 50 people at the table, and they came to present the pros and cons of what we're doing, for them to come to the table and say, hey, you know what? What we heard was really worrisome. Are we going far enough? And that was the question that we've asked ourselves in caucus. Are we going far enough? Some people said yes, some people said no. Ultimately, there was a discussion, a really fruitful discussion, and the premier decided that was enough.
Did some people say, are we going too far?
Some people thought that we were going too far. Some people thought we were not going far enough. We're a coalition. And we all come from different horizons. We have former liberals in our party. We have former ADQ members in our party, and we have former Piquists in our party. So we really cover the whole political spectrum. So really, this is a project. What unites us is the fact that we want to turn the page on sovereignty and these debates that have fractured Quebec throughout history.
So the thinking now is that Bill 96 is not going to get passed up until perhaps the next election, and the premier will run on this perhaps up until the next election.
That's not our intention.
Okay, but it's sort of one of the things you read now in terms of what the plan is for this. But end of the day, as Bill said,
can I just intervene? If you look at the over 15 hours we've already done on Bill 96, you'll see that we're not the ones slowing down the process. If I was the Liberal Party, I would be very concerned about Bill 96, which is why I don't think they're in a hurry.
Why would you be concerned if you were a Liberal?
Well, they seem to be going along with it. Yes.
We're only on article, I think, 8 now, and we spent 15 hours. They are using all their time to make sure that they're heard.
Wait, are you suggesting there's nothing in there? They're doing this just to stall it, or do you not feel there are actual articles in there that need to be discussed?
Oh, I think there's plenty of things in there that need to be discussed, and we're going to propose other amendments as well. But that's not the issue. The issue is, how committed are they to move the file forward? I'm not sure they're that committed. And to be fair, they're not in an easy position. Their writings are in places that may not typically like what it is that we're proposing, yet the gains that they want to make are in places that really do.
Well, hold on. So why, you talk about the writings that they hold maybe not in favor, what would be that they did not or would not like?
Well, for instance, enshrining further that French is the common language in Quebec so that the government is more exemplary. That was always the case since 1977, but what this bill does now is it makes it a reality on the ground tomorrow morning after the bill is passed.
Do you think there are actually Anglophones living here who think that French is not the common language or that have an issue with that?
Well, I think there are some. There are some people who
not like the way it was. Come on.
I'm not throwing mud here, but what I'm saying is there are some people who have not accepted Bill 101, few as they may be, and some people also have a fear. And I really want to put a lot of emphasis on this fear. What I'm hearing mostly is a lot of the concerns are addressed, and I've responded to them. There's nothing that hurts the English community per se. And one of the things that I had in my mind when I was defending this bill is to say, how does this affect my friends that I grew up with in high school? Are my buddies going to get hurt by this bill? And the reason I can sleep at night is because I know that this bill does not do that to them.
Yet at the same time, I think there was a story today on the Quebec Bar Association warning about what's in Bill 96. Quebec Medical Association has spoken about this, not in a positive light. Isn't that in and of itself concerning enough to say, wait a sec, maybe there's some things in here that do need to be discussed and there shouldn't be a rush to get this passed?
And no one is in a rush. We have another 10 months till the election. We're not in a rush either. We want to have the best bill possible, and that's what we're going to do. I hope the opposition is constructive, and let's hope that they are, and we get the best bill possible.
Okay. Let's move and talk about something else that's very much in the news the last couple of days.
Even more contentious.
Bill 21. We know the situation. The teacher who was removed from her job as a teacher by virtue of the fact that she wore a hijab. And you and I were talking about this before we actually started. We had a rather interesting conversation. And you said, well, why did the school board hire her? They knew that contravened the law. And I said, you know what? Let's move beyond the school board. They made a mistake. I think most people agree they should not have hired her. But given what's happened, this is egg on the face for the CAQ. It's egg on the face for Bill 21, not just here, but it's drawn a reaction across the country. Does that matter?
I disagree that it's egg on the face. I think I'm thinking of all the people who used to wear religious symbols who took off their religious symbols in order to comply with the law. Those people went into work one day, took off the religious symbols that were important for them in order to comply with the law. So I'm happy that the law is being applied in a uniform manner. I don't think that this is egg in the face. I think secularism is not something to be scared of. I think secularism is about equality, not about division. And for me, living in a secular society is something that makes me proud. The fact that we've turned the page of that Catholic history that we had 50 years ago, that we moved forward to get religion out of the state, the fact that we've limited it only to persons in authority in a very responsible way following 10 years of discourse and a parliamentary commission, I think we've landed on the right space. Now, of course, you know, what happened this week was unfortunate. It really
Some
was.
people say this is a solution to a problem that never existed, that doesn't exist now. Why is that not accurate?
People have been saying that for 10 years, yet it always came back, right? We always had to have this discussion in the political discourse. We had to the point where in order to make it go away, we had a parliamentary commission, and then some parties said we're going to do it and we're going to go further with it. So I think Quebec has turned in circles enough on this. What we promised to do when we came to power, we did it. We did it quickly and we put it to rest. And I think most Quebecers are happy living in a place that passed that law. I think it actually created a social peace.
Yeah.
Most
I'm not-
Quebecers
I'm
outside
not.
of
Yeah,
Montreal.
I think
I'm
most,
not, you know,
most
not
is
at
not
all,
is
yeah.
not 3 million people who are not very happy with this.
I say most because polling, it's not perfect because we didn't do a referendum, but polling suggests that it's anywhere between 65 and 75% of Quebecers agree with that. In these days and age, I think that's a pretty strong score. What's even more interesting is people in Ontario who are people who typically don't agree with these types of things, and where a lot of this bad press is coming from that you discuss. Bill 21 at the time that I was discussing it over there was at 40%. So if you look across the board, there is concern about the place of religion and the mixing it with government. I think our neighbors to the south are showing us some of the problems that can happen when you mix religion and politics. And I think Quebecers, with their history with the Catholic Church very present in their lives, have a strong suspicion of that. And I think overall we did the right thing and we put it to rest.
You know, I asked you when we were talking before, this idea of religion and separating religion from the state. I would understand if a teacher was teaching religion or indoctrinating students in a class, and she happened to be wearing a hijab, so she's Muslim. She's teaching math. What possible difference could that make?
You know, a lot of times when we talk about Bill 21, and this is where you know, intelligent people can disagree. I get that I'm not going to get unanimity at this table, but I think when we focus a lot about the individual's right to their religion, we forget the people receiving the service's right to be free from religion. So as a society, as a democratic society, we have to respect individual rights and freedoms of individuals. But the collectivity also has rights. And as a society, we have a right to be free of religion as well. And I think that's what it is to live in a place that separates church and
But
state.
the assumption by you saying that, Chris, is that you're not free of religion just because someone is standing in a class teaching you math equations and they happen to be wearing a headdress, a hijab.
Let me give you an example. If I'm I don't know, if I'm in court one day and I'm wearing a kippah and I'm there defending my rights, and I see a person who's wearing a religious symbol like a hijab, or I think I can reasonably deduce that, well, am I getting a fair shake? Am I not? And I think that adds a complication to a situation that's already very disconcerting.
Yeah, but if they're not wearing anything, then you have actually no idea.
You have no
They
idea
still
where
have their
they're coming
beliefs.
from.
That's right. That's right. It's the same reason why, and this is what we talked about off screen, Aaron, it's the same reason why we give police officers uniforms. We tell them, hey, you know what? When you come to work, you're not John or Tom. You're Officer 5678, and your job is the criminal code. I don't care what you think as a person. Your job is to follow the law and arrest people who break it. And we deliberately remove individuals from their role in those cases, which is why I think in terms of...
That's you saying, and I'll use the example you just gave, that's you saying a police officer wearing a turban can't somehow make a judgment based on the law, on criminal law, by virtue of the fact that he's wearing a turban. He can't determine what's fair or unfair for the person he's dealing with. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
No, I think...
You have a built-in bias that way if that's what you believe.
Well, I don't have a bias. I believe that police officers who wear uniforms should wear the required uniform. Adding a religious symbol would be like adding a political pin. It's not part of the uniform. It's the same reason why civil servants are not allowed to wear a PQ pin on their lapels or a Liberal Party pin on their lapels.
So wearing a turban is equivalent to wearing a political pin?
No, what I'm saying is the reason why you have a uniform in the first place is to strip down as much as we can the individual from the role. And in persons in authority, that is critically important because the state has the power to deny you your rights, has the power to throw you in jail, has the power to constrain you. I think in those situations, it's not a big ask to say, in that case, we need you to be exemplary in your neutrality.
But go ahead, Bill.
Chris, you find it somewhat ironic that the teacher who was dismissed has now been relegated to a position to write about diversity, which I find kind of interesting and unusual all at the same time. And somebody in the school system there could be doing things like picking up garbage or being a janitor and so on and so forth. Would that not also, be the same thing in a sense?
So when we talk about teachers in schools, right? The criminal code already says that if you're a teacher and, for instance, you sexually abuse one of your students, the criminal code already says beyond sexual abuse, because you're in a position of authority, we're throwing the book at you and adding more years to your term because of the role that you had as a teacher in authority, right? So being a teacher is not a small thing. It is a role that is fraught with responsibility and an extension of the power of the state on children. So this is the reason why Bill 21 extends to classrooms and teachers at the elementary and high school level.
But this woman will still be working at the school.
Yes, but she won't be in a position of authority.
No, she's allowed to clean the floors, but she's not allowed to teach the children.
Right.
I asked my kids.
Well, that's a.
Is that correct, though?
Yeah.
That's absolutely correct.
That's accurate, yeah.
I asked my kids, who are age 20 and 17, when all of this started, what they thought, because they did have teachers with headscarves. My kids said they were happy to see that everybody wasn't the same in the world. They had no problem with anybody with any kind of religious symbol teaching them. The teachers were there to teach. I wonder how often we ask the kids, because a lot of the kids in this situation were affected by this teacher who was removed from the class. I think as adults we're thinking a lot for our kids, instead of really seeing how much it actually affects the children.
I have a 13-year-old daughter, and she agrees with me. So
she doesn't want her teacher to have a headscarf?
She agrees that religion is not to be, school is not the place to demonstrate your religion because you're in a position of authority. So I think that comes from different upbringings and different priorities, and that's fair.
Have we also taken all the Christmas trees out of the schools? Just to make sure.
Okay, so you would have us remove all Christmas trees, and you'd have us remove everything, yeah? Well, that's a reasonable argument.
Christmas is a religious holiday for Christians.
I heard the question raised today in the case of the teacher in Chelsea. How do you explain to a family, say a Muslim family or brother and sister, where the man could get a job teaching, he's a Muslim, but the woman couldn't, even though they're both equally qualified, but just by virtue of that.
That's a very good point, because it brings me to the other point when I say that secularism is about equality. I don't know of any religion that is gracious to women, that puts women on an equal footing as men, or that says that women are allowed to do everything in society equal to men. And for me, secularism is a way of guaranteeing women's rights. It is not a way of denying women's rights. So I wonder how some people reconcile the awful things that some religions say about homosexuality, about sexual diversity, about women in general, abortion, and how they reconcile all those things, and then say, well, religion is an inherent good. It's always good, and the individual. I'm all about making sure that we're equal. And one of the things that I remember discussing with a resident of my riding, he was born in Egypt and he moved to Quebec. And I asked him, I said, at the height of Bill 21, I was expecting another answer, to be fair. But I said, what do you think about Bill 21? And he says, you know what, monsieur? He goes, in my country, religion destroyed my country. He goes, ici au Québec, on est tout pareil. And that stayed with me.
Yeah, but I'm sure that's why a lot of people who come here, because they have the freedom of their religion, which they didn't have in the country they came from. And then they get here and find out, well, we have it, but it's limited. Well, I can only have it as far as the job I have, because if I want to get a job as a policeman, got to leave the religion like it would be at home.
You forget that even in those countries, I am thinking of Algeria or Morocco, they don't allow women police officers to wear the hijab either.
We are not Algeria or Morocco. We
You're
don't
right.
have to set an example with a country that doesn't allow those things. We have to set a better example with a country that does.
You're right. In a Muslim country, they recognize that religion has no role to play in the use of power, but we're going to be better than those countries who understand their religion more, and then we're going to be telling them how to do it.
No, we don't have to understand their religion. We have to understand their right to be able to do whatever they want with respect to their religion, which is to show it if they want to, wear a hijab, wear a kippah, wear a crucifix. If they want to, why does that cause an issue? That's not necessarily your religious statement. That's just what you believe. So do I have a right to tell you what you couldn't believe? Or a right to tell you where you could or couldn't believe it? That's the part that I have an issue with.
I think it's a reasonable ask that when, again, the state has the power to throw you in jail and deny you your freedoms, that you be exemplary in your neutrality. And married to the fact that no religion that I know of is gracious and genuinely accommodating to the role of women and their rights as equal members of society, abortion, as you mentioned, and other things, I'm quite comfortable saying that in certain limited cases, it's okay during your hours of work, that
Yeah,
we
so
don't
we're
allow
not.
it.
We're never going to go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to point something out, is that I live with a French-Canadian man who was formerly separatist. Because
Formally.
Well, he probably still is, but I was going to say formerly a PQ member a long time ago. And these two issues have divided our household like nothing. I mean, you can't even imagine the fights, and we fight over nothing. But these two bills are killing my relationship, which shows the division between, let's say, the Anglophone community in this case and the Francophone. But it's two sets of beliefs, and there's very little common ground that we can find. So I think a lot of us can talk about these things for a long time, but it's extremely divisive.
Yeah.
And we're both stubborn on our sides, and I listen to him, and he listens to me. And then he sleeps in the guest room. But just to say that, no, but this is a big issue here because it really divides so many Montrealers and Quebecers.
On that, I think if it's useful for your audience that wants to have a genuine intellectual exercise about this important debate, right? Because I don't profess to have the truth on the matter. I think it's important that we have the debate, and as a society, we agree on having the debate. But what I would ask your audience to consider is Francophones come from the Civil Code. French people come from the Civil Code, which is drastically different from common law. I know that sounds very technical and very geeky, but that reality changes everything because the Civil Code puts the group ahead of the individual. Common law puts the individual ahead of the group. So that very thinking, our mindset is different from the outset in the way that we see our role in the community, our role in society.
What's absolutely striking about Bill 96 to me is the lack of political opposition to it. Everybody's scared to, basically get into a slugfest with the CAQ and Legault. I mean, it's stunning, like when you hear Trudeau and the other part, nobody's willing to step up.
And if I may delicately say, maybe that tells you everything you need to know about the hair on fire.
Yeah,
no, I don't think so.
I'm just throwing it out there.
Let me ask the question.
I'm outnumbered here.
So how do you play that through, though?
Well, hold on. I'm outnumbered here, but if you let me finish my thought,
Okay.
you have the federal Liberals, you have the PCC, you have the NDP, you have the provincial Liberals, you have the QS, you have basically everybody on every political spectrum and every level of government saying, we have some concerns, but really overall we're down with the principle. And then we have a select few of people.
Yeah, I'm not so sure I'm down with the principle part.
Oh yeah, the city
Last
of Montreal.
couple of days, you've had people stand up and say, you know what? I'm not proud to be a Quebecer. It's a cowardly thing that the government
Well, he's
has
talking
done.
about Bill 96.
Oh, I'm
You're
sorry. I thought you were talking
21.
about Bill 21.
But on Bill 96, you've heard Valérie Plante, you've heard most most elected officials in most areas of government
Which
agree
strikes
with
me
it.
as very odd, given we don't have a Bill 96. You have 202 clauses, if you will, in this bill. What'd you get through? 8 so far in the National Assembly?
Yeah.
We don't even know what's ultimately going to be in this bill other than the clauses that are in there now, and they're being discussed one at a time,
Slowly.
So we're talking about something we don't even have a finite document.
Well, we have a statement of principle, right? What the government does is we put down a statement of principle.
But I'm getting it from what you're saying. There are going to be a lot of changes. You said you have amendments that are going to be coming as well. We're a long way away from knowing what's in this
I
bill.
think it's normal that there are changes,
But
right?
no,
The
that's
opposition's going
fine.
to say something smart,
Sure.
right? And we're going to agree
Sure.
with it, and we're going to make the
But
changes.
let me go back and ask one other thing because we're going to run out of time, and that is with respect to Bill 21. You've heard everyone speak out. I heard Jagmeet Singh speak out today saying what he's always said. We heard Mark Miller, a bit of surprise from Liberal ministers actually coming out and saying these things. What's the process for this? It's in Quebec Court of Appeal now, Superior Court. What happens if you lose?
Well, I can't speculate as to what happens if
Sure
you
you
lose.
can.
But what I can say is, I think my takeaway from growing up during the 1995 referendum was I love Canada and I don't want to separate. And I think that at some point we have to listen to the Francophone majority when they ask what they need from Canada in order to be happy in Canada. And I've chosen to say, well, I don't think it's unreasonable that Quebec, much like in the Meat Accords or Charlottetown, be given a certain deference in certain areas in order to protect the French language in Quebec and in North America, and to protect that fact going forward. And I would ask people out there who are suspicious of the CAQ or suspicious of this way of thinking, maybe, just maybe, it's the price for Canada. And that's what I've chosen. I've chosen to fight for that place in Canada, and I think Quebec doesn't want to leave, but they need the tools that allow them to stay. And I think that's what we're trying to do, and I think we need to keep the dialogue going.
Do you think that's what some of your fellow ministers feel?
Yeah. I think everybody who joined the CAQ understands that we're not about creating les conditions gagnantes or being totally federalist to the point where there's no difference between you and the Liberal Party of Ontario. We are in the sweet spot of what academics call l'allérisme, which is what created the ADQ at the time, which is a vision of Quebec that is a little bit more autonomous, that has the room it needs to pass laws on secularism if it wants, to protect its language, having the tools to do that, but also to stay in Canada proudly. I think that's what Quebecers want.
Can I ask you one last thing with respect to what you said before on Bill 96, the English rights being guaranteed? You know, the idea of historic Quebec Anglos is defined by Bill 101 in 1977. How does that change? Who's going to be able to access those services once this bill is passed?
This is the straight dope on that. If you were here when we put the bill down, regardless of whether or not you're a historic or born here or not, if you were getting your papers in English, you're going to keep getting them in English. Tomorrow, don't worry about it. Bill 101, however, has always said that au Québec, on francise les immigrants. The objective was always to say, when you come to Quebec, since 1977, you migrate to French. The transfer of language had to be done towards French. The reality is, the government of Quebec has not been exemplary in that way. This bill is going to correct some of that to say that when you immigrate to Quebec, regardless of where you're from, you're going to be asked to transition to French. So that's now the term historic is a little bit of a misnomer because it suggests unfairly, dare I say to the man who made the T-shirt, that there's actually a split between the two people. The reality is there are people who the historic community have a right to go to English schools, and then there are immigrants who didn't have that right, but identify as English-speaking Quebecers. The government's not going to tell you you can't be a member of CJAD just because you're born in the Philippines. No. The government is saying, no, in order to be successful in Quebec, if you choose to live here, you choose to move here, you need to learn French. You need to transition to French to be successful.
I get that, but you're just saying, correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying that if you are an anglophone, or you speak English, you identify as Anglo, the day this bill is passed, if you've been getting services in English, you'll continue to receive them. Is that what you said?
Remember what I said before about my friends that I grew up with, my Greek friends, Manoli and Tom and John, those guys that were getting their papers in English, and their parents who were elderly, who were getting their papers in English, they are unaffected by this bill. There is a grandfather clause.
And what about your children?
Their children, if you were getting them before, you're not. So if they're under 18, no. If they're over 18, those kids, yes.
So your kids under 18, once they become adults, once this bill is passed, can no longer expect to receive services in English, even though their parents are Anglophones.
But it depends.
Right?
It depends. If they went to English school, of course, they're going to keep getting their documents in whatever language that they want. If they weren't, no.
So by doing the right thing and trying to send their children to French school, now they're going to lose right to access in English services by virtue of having done that.
But if they went to French school, they don't need the English document.
Yes,
What if they want
a lot of
the English?
documents
Need and want.
If they went to French school, the problem is solved.
No, it's not.
No, it's actually
I went
not.
to French
Well,
school.
I
It's solved
humbly
from
disagree.
your perspective
No.
I
because
humbly
you're saying they
disagree.
can function in French.
I think if you went to French school your whole life,
Yeah.
did dictées that my son is doing that I probably couldn't pass when I was 20, he's going to be okay to read a document that they get from the SAA.
So eventually there'll be no historic Anglos left.
That's not true. That's not true.
Well, everybody over at a certain
Only if they go
point.
to English school, right?
You went to English school. You're a couple. Of what I'm understanding is you have a French husband, so you have children. They're the ayants droits because one parent has it. So there's a lot of ways for the English community to grow, but there's two types of things. You can still be a member, like for instance QCGN, and even though you're not an ayant droit, nothing removes you from the community. We're talking about who has access to documents from the government on an individual level. That's very different from your sentiment d'appartenance. You're not going to lose CJAD listeners because they're not an ayant droit. That has nothing to do.
I get that.
That's about the exemplarity of the state.
The issue has been about services and who will continue to receive them, and it's been kind of vague with respect to who will and who won't. I would just ask the one other thing you mentioned earlier. I don't know if this applies or not. The idea you talked about being able to get legal services, I don't know if they're grandfathered in Bill 96 or not, in English, right?
They're enshrined in the Constitution.
But you have a minister who's basically said, well, you know what, we'll get you a translator. We're not going to let you actually go to court and speak English in the court because we can't guarantee you can find a bilingual judge.
First of all, that's the way it is everywhere in Canada, including Quebec.
That you can plead in whatever language you want.
You can plead, a lawyer, a judge, and a defendant, and the prosecutor can plead in whatever language that they want in either of the two official languages. And if the person or somebody in there doesn't understand in that formula, there's an interpreter that's called to interpret the proceedings. Francophones in British Columbia have that right. Okay, the same right applies to Quebecers, except in Quebec, English-speaking Quebecers have a greater access to justice because more judges are bilingual.
Right, but that's no longer a specification or requirement for those judges to be bilingual.
So
right?
what Minister Jolin Barrette had said was that in order to, it shouldn't be a systematic criteria for selection. In other words, you had judges that were applying to be judges in Saint Jerome or in Abitibi or Côte-Nord, and they had the mandatory requirement to be bilingual. There's no need to be bilingual in Côte-Nord. You can have an interpreter and get access to justice. So and when you look at the exemplarity of the state, remember that's the focus. We're saying, is it normal that a unilingual francophone can't become a judge? At some point, you have to be consistent with the objective to say a unilingual francophone should be allowed in Quebec to become a judge. That's not the case right now because of that bilingual criteria. We're trying to fix that. But of course, that doesn't affect the person receiving the service who has the right under Section 133 of the Charter.
It does, but in a different way. Well, sure it does.
Well, so Francophone in British Columbia because he's not getting it.
Well, now we're into Francophones in British Columbia. I thought we could stay here.
It's the same right.
So,
it's the same right.
I understand that it's the same right, but it's probably not the same number of problems you'd run into there as you will have over here.
Right, and apparently here there's a terrible backlog and there are not enough translators.
Just to be clear, in the Montreal area, the bilingual criteria will stay.
I understand.
Will stay. Because it makes sense, right? So what the minister is doing is he's putting into law the requirement to say, is it needed? Yes, no, okay. If it's not, then you don't need it.
We're out of time. Let me get to the biggest question. Well, hold on. Let me ask one more question here, Chris.
And I got a question.
Hold on. Does the next Canadian's general manager need to speak French?
Yes.
Okay. Bill?
Yes, even we agree on it.
Chris, if the CAQ is as welcoming as you purport it to be, I mean, and you're reasonable, why can't it make a breakthrough in Montreal amongst Anglos or Francos?
Well, I would posit. I won't speculate on the next election, but I would say we're going to make some inroads in Montreal. And it bears reminding that the CAQ does better with Anglophones than the Liberals do with Francophones. So I'm not ashamed of how well we're received in the English community.
All right. You've been very generous with your time.
You have.
I appreciate that. We all do.
We're not letting
Having
you
me.
go.
I know. I've understood that I'm not going anywhere.
Now you must
can't
have
get out
routine.
even if you tried.
Right.
That's going to wrap
For
up
a
this
special
edition of the Corner
Christmas.
Booth Podcast. I want to thank our special guest, Christopher Skeete, and we'll see you again soon.